for joining us today. We really appreciate you, bringing your time and energy into this space with us. And welcome to this presentation on building community awareness on suicide and suicide prevention. So the World Health Organization recognizes that community-based initiatives, such as the workshop today, as well as some other initiatives that we'll share with you later on in our presentation, play a really important role in preventing suicide. By understanding some basic information about suicide, you'll become part of a network of important resources in your community that can really do a lot to help people stay safe. Pardon me, I'm a little bit nervous. We've got quite a few people here. So this presentation, as Erin said, this is a suicide information and awareness presentation. We will be putting the number for Talk Suicide Canada into the chat. So if at any point during the presentation you're feeling overwhelmed, please take the time to step away. You can call Talk Suicide Canada anytime to have conversations about suicide. We will mention them a number of times. If you do need to step away and take care of yourself, we really ask that you do let us know, so you can send a message. Just send a message to Erin, let her know, or you can email us later on, and our emails are really easy to find on the website of CMHA Nova Scotia. Now's a really great time as well to just think about what kind of things you might find comforting for yourself, just to kind of ensure your own psychological safety and emotional well-being as we move into this conversation. Okay, that being said, let's step into it a little bit here. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Lindsay Miller. My pronouns are she and her, and also I use they and them pronouns. I use those interchangeably. I've been working in the field of mental health for about 15 years, mostly frontline service provision with people experiencing severe and chronic mental illness. And I had the opportunity, along with Sarah in 2021, to be trained in ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And since then, Sarah and I have been traveling around the province, holding these 2-day training workshops with people all over Nova Scotia and having really wonderful, intensive, and heartbreaking conversations with people about suicide. It's been a really big learning experience for me. And through the experience, I've come to realize also how close this topic is to myself and how personal it is. As a member of the 2S LGBTQ population or identity, I am part of a community that has a disproportionately high rate of suicidal ideation, thoughts, and actions. And what I've realized is that those stats that I see on the screen, they're not just stats, they're not just numbers. Those are my close friends, those are my community members, those are my family. And so it has become more and more apparent to me of how important it is to begin to be able to have these conversations, to ask these questions, and to be able to listen compassionately about the real experiences with suicide that many of us have and have had. So it is really important work, and I feel really privileged to be in this position and doing this work right now. And I'll pass it over to Sarah to introduce herself as well.
Welcome, everybody. As Lindsay was saying, my name is Sarah Frizzle, and I'm coming to you today from Truro. I do use the pronouns of she and her. I have been doing this work for about 3 years with CMHA-Nova Scotia, delivering programs such as these all across the province. These are important conversations. This is important information. I myself have had family members and have supported family members through their time of need when they're having these suicidal thoughts or behaviors. And I recognized very early on how important having open communication can be, and how powerful that is for someone that is able to have those conversations. So I welcome you all. I'm so thankful that we have so many people here today. It just shows how important of a conversation it is, because conversations such as these reduce the stigma that prevent people from having conversations. So I welcome you all. Please take care of yourself during this session. So if you do need some support, as Erin said, please reach out. Carolyn is here to talk. Carolyn is here to offer her support in finding you resources. So we're just thankful to have you here today.
Carolyn, I just realized we didn't make a space officially for you to introduce yourself. Did you want to do that, or I can introduce you? Oh, you're on mute. I will introduce Carolyn. Carolyn is the Education and Training Coordinator team lead. She is a wonderful, excellent listener and has offered to kind of hold space if anybody needs it and help you find your way to other resources and support. So thank you, Carolyn, for being here. She won't be on mute if you need to speak with her. It's just mute in the main room here. All right. Oh.
Thank you. So before we get started, we just wanted to kind of give the heads up. So Lindsay and I are educators. We are not clinicians. We're here to provide some resources and some information that can help you care for your mental health and well-being, as well as develop your resiliency to be able to have these open conversations. This content can be challenging, especially on this virtual platform. I know for me, having these conversations, I want to see body language, I want to see facial expressions to know how this is landing for people, because sometimes this is the first time we've had conversations such as these. So again, please take care of yourself during this journey with us. If you're feeling the need for additional support beyond this program, a lovely resource that I've used in the past is 211, as well as the resource list that we have sent out prior and we will send out again. If you are feeling overwhelmed and need to step away, 100% okay, but if you could just let Erin know that you're stepping away, and then one of us can check in with you later just to see if you need some help connecting to other resources. Thank you again for taking the time to care for your mental health and well-being. We're glad to have you here with us today. We will, at the end, as Erin and Lindsay have said, have a question and answer kind of period. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. So please join us, no pressure. We also have the Talk Suicide Canada number at the top there, and I believe that Erin is going to pop that into the chat for everybody. And with this number, I just wanted to kind of give people information about this number. This is a number that you can call whenever you are having thoughts or feelings of your own, or you're supporting someone else who's having thoughts or feelings. If you're concerned about someone, you can reach out to this number. And thank you, Erin. You can reach out for this number to just talk about suicide. It's a safe space to talk. So yeah, so welcome. I also recommend that you put this into your own contacts. As we all know, or most of us know, emotions and feelings can come up at any time for us and the people we support. So having this number on hand is really helpful for those times that we're in those crises. I often tell people it's better to be prepared, and this is one number that I definitely have in my phone to be prepared.
Right. All right, so we wanted to give you a sense of what we're heading into, what our objectives of this presentation are. We timed the presentation. We think it's about an hour 15 minutes, so it's a little it's not super short. Hopefully that will be okay for everyone. And so what our aims today are to increase our awareness of the issue of suicide, and to talk about some of the things that we can do. I'm just going to click through those. To talk about some of the things that we can do in our professional and personal lives to support someone who may be feeling suicidal. This is a relatively short workshop. It's an hour 15, so it might feel like a while, but given the amount of work and the amount of training that we can do around this stuff, this is a very short introduction. So hopefully it will, help us better understand suicide, what it is and isn't, and help us be more prepared to talk about suicide thoughts and behaviors. That said, this is not a full, complete suicide intervention training session. If you are interested in more in-depth sessions, we will discuss further learning opportunities at the end of the workshop, or at the end of the presentation. I also want folks to know that we're not seeking interaction or participation in this workshop. I know that can sometimes make people anxious to think that they might be asked to share or bring something forward, and we are not asking that of this workshop. So if that is something that makes you nervous, you can relax. Just sit back and turn your screen off or drink your tea or whatever you need to. And again, if you do have questions or comments, you can send them to Erin in the chat, and we'll either answer them at the end of the workshop, or Erin can connect you with Carolyn if you need to talk as well. So today we're going to be discussing some common myths and misunderstandings around suicide. We're going to be talking about why it's important to have safer and non-judgmental conversations with people who may be having thoughts of suicide. We'll talk a bit about certain signs that a person might be struggling with their mental health and possibly having thoughts of suicide, and what to do when we notice those signs. And we'll also talk about where and when to reach out for further support and help. So we'll be closing by looking at some further educational resources, training opportunities, and a little bit at community-based suicide prevention and life promoting initiatives that are happening around the province. Connecting with other people on this stuff is really powerful.
So before we get started, we thought it would be helpful to pose this question. And to be honest, most of the time when we pose this question, we're looking for that interactive piece. But I still think it's a good question to get us thinking, because many of us have reasons why we don't talk about suicide. And so the question is, why do we think people don't talk about suicide? And some answers that have come up in previous sessions and previous courses that we've taught kind of surround themselves around the stigma around suicide. Suicide's viewed in a negative way, and oftentimes people who are struggling are viewed in a negative way. So their behaviors, their thoughts are oftentimes stigmatized. So where does this stigma come from? And for each one of us, that can be very unique. But a lot of us have talked about in the past that our values and our beliefs around suicide come from our families, from the communities that we grew up in, big or small, from our religious beliefs, from social media. We kind of learn these stigmas through that. And it is something we can unlearn, but it just takes practice. So with these feelings of, with this stigma, it often brings up feelings of shame. And these are feelings that a person with thoughts of suicide or with suicide behaviors may feel, but also for people who have experienced worrying grief for a loved one that is experiencing these thoughts or behaviors. Another reason why people think that people don't talk about suicide is because of fear. That fear that it will put this into their heads. And we're going to talk about some myths in a little bit, but that's definitely one of those fears that people think is true. Fear of not knowing what to do. What happens if I myself are having thoughts? What happens if someone I know is having thoughts? That fear piece. The fear of the repercussions. Once I disclose something, what's going to happen next? So a lot of people might have questions around that. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my partner? What are my friends going to think of me? Am I going to lose my kids if I disclose to someone that I'm having suicidal thoughts or behaviors? So another fear might be rejection, judgment. Those are all real fears that people have when they think about disclosing something about suicide. Beliefs that we believe are true. Again, back to that piece about where we learned our stigmas and the taboos around not talking about suicide. But that's where I think we need to start the conversation, is talking about those myths, talking about the things that we assume to be true because we've always said them. We've always kind of, that's how conversations have gone through over the years. So these myths feed into that shame and that taboo and that fear of talking about suicide. So I think that's a great place to start is let's debunk some myths in hopes to encourage people to be able to talk openly and with less judgment around suicide. So I think we'll start there. So here is a few, or here's one myth. People who talk about suicide should not be, oh, sorry. People who talk about suicide, it gives someone the idea of suicide, encourages suicide behavior. And this is definitely something that I grew up thinking that was a fact. If we talk about suicide, it's going to put that thought into someone's head. But that is a myth. That is not true. Talking about suicide and talking about mental illness will not cause someone to begin to have thoughts or ideations of suicide. But talking will help. Talking can allow someone to feel better, to finally disclose. We often say in our courses that suicide gets us alone. It's very isolating in our thoughts and feelings. So to be able to disclose that to someone, we're going to feel a little bit less alone. Back to what Aaron was saying about that hope piece, it can relieve that pressure of carrying that heavy load all by themselves. People don't want to talk about it because we oftentimes believe these myths and stigma. So this is a great place to start, is kind of debunking some of those. The next one is people who talk about suicide should not be taken seriously. And again, not true. If someone is talking about suicide, we should not dismiss it as just talk. Some people have ideations and thoughts, may speak about it before acting on those behaviors. Not always, but we know that some people talk about it before acting on those behaviors. So it's better to err on that side of caution, just in case. Talking helps to lessen the stigma around this issue and allows individuals to get their feelings out. Again, that piece of hope. By talking to someone, it may bring up other options. So as I said, suicide gets us alone. It's isolating. So if we share it with someone, maybe they might have some ideas of other options besides suicide. And the next one is, people who talk about suicide or act on suicide thoughts are just looking for attention. And I've heard people say this. I've heard it on TV. But when someone talks about suicide or has suicide behaviors, this may be their attention or their attempt to get help. This may be someone not knowing how to ask for help or how to talk about suicide because of that stigma around suicide. So it might just be them asking for help. It's not attention seeking. A person may not know how to ask for help because of those stigmas. And it may show, but it may show in their behaviors. It may show in some of the things that they're saying to us. So some subtle cues might be, nobody would miss me anyway, or things would be better if I wasn't around anymore. So these are subtle cues that might give us the idea that someone is thinking about suicide. This is not an attention piece. This is someone seeking help and just not knowing how to do that. And the last one on this page is, all persons who have thoughts of suicide have suicide behaviors. And again, this is just not true. Some people who have thoughts of suicide may never act on that behavior. Some people have chronic thoughts of suicide and never act on this behavior. Again, it's not true for all, but a lot of people who have suicide thoughts do not act on a suicide behavior. We're going to go through a few more with Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for starting us off there. So yeah, I'm just going to take a look at another couple of myths and things that are misunderstandings around suicide. The first one being the idea that someone who is smart or successful would never die by suicide. And I think we can probably all take a moment to think of the wide-ranging impacts of the suicides of really public figures such as maybe Robin Williams or more recently Twitch. where in our eyes publicly they seem to have it all together, but we have no idea what was happening under the surface for them. So the truth is that anyone can be at risk of having suicide thoughts and behaviors. And although we might from the outside not understand why a person's having these thoughts, they're often in a lot of pain, or they're experiencing a loss that's significant to them. We never know what's kind of happening for people. So every person's experiences and their reactions are going to be unique to them. Another misunderstanding is sometimes there's an understanding that rates of suicide are highest during the winter holidays. There's a spelling mistake there. Sorry about that. So the truth is suicide can happen any time of year. The ones that do occur during the holidays often have a really big and wide-ranging impact on people. They all do, of course, but the ones that occur around the holidays tend to be very, very difficult. But the truth is that suicide can occur at any point in the year. So this is a really common misunderstanding, and that is that self-harm behaviors are the same as suicidal behaviors. So self-harm is generally not an attempt to die. It is most people who self-injure report that they do it to feel better. It's often a way to express their pain and sometimes a way to stop the urges of suicidal thoughts. Self-harm and suicide behaviors are distinct from each other, but often many people who self-injure may also struggle with suicide thoughts and behaviors. So self-harm might be an external expression of internal pain. And then we must always take it seriously when we're looking at things through this lens and looking at the lens of suicide prevention. And the last myth that we're going to kind of talk about and tackle today is the idea that only individuals with a diagnosed mental illness will die by suicide. And the truth is that not all people who end their life by suicide have a mental illness. As we stated before, some people who are struggling with pain or loss in their life may see suicide as the solution. It does not necessarily mean that they have a mental illness, and they don't necessarily go together. However, suicide can also be linked to the symptoms of many different mental illnesses as well. So generally, we need to take all suicide thoughts, expressions, and actions seriously, whether or not we think this person may or may not be at risk.
So we've gone through some myths about myths about suicide, but what do we mean by suicide? What does that actually mean? So suicide means that someone ends their life on purpose. However, back to that stigma piece, people who think about suicide, die by suicide, or have suicidal behaviors may not really want to end their life. They may not be able to see any way out of their painful situation in the moment. Suicide is a permanent response to what is often a passing struggle. And we recognize that this is a hard conversation. Talking about suicide is hard for many of us. That's why conversations such as these are so important. It's a chance to be open, to learn how we can support each other, to have safer communication around suicide. And the language we use is oftentimes harmful, and we may not even be aware of it. I often say to people, we don't know until we know, and our language that we use, we may not know is actually harmful. So this is one that I had to learn, and I welcome us to learn this together about more suicide-safe language. So as I was saying, suicide-safe language is important. How we refer to suicide contributes to the stigma, and it may limit people from talking about suicide. When we use positive phrases when a suicide is carried through, and negative phrases when there's suicide behaviors, but does not result in death, this can be harmful and result in more stigma. Having language that's more neutral offers a non-judgmental space and hopefully encourages and comfort to further explore communication. So when we think of a person who is experiencing those thoughts or have had those behaviors, or a person that has lost someone to suicide, imagine yourself with these conversations and how they might be perceived. And we're going to go through a few because, like I said, we don't know until we know, and I had to learn these. So the first one that I would like to look at is they took their life or they committed suicide. So when you hear someone say statements like this, they committed suicide, this is language we're trying to kind of get away from. This language holds a criminal undertone and a judgment. So when we think of a person who is grieving a death by suicide, they may not be open to have further conversations if they've had heard this statement. So this statement holds a lot of judgment. So now we try to say it was their final decision to end their life, or be direct and state they died by suicide. This holds no judgment, it's just the action of they died by suicide. The next one is they attempted suicide. And this one holds a negative judgment and attitude that this person was not successful in something they were trying to do. And again, some of these quotes and some of these conversation pieces are things that we're used to saying, but it does hold a negative connotation. So now we try to say things such as they've had suicide behaviors. This statement again shows an action and holds no judgment and hopefully furthers conversation. And the last one is completed suicide or successful suicide. So this holds a positive belief that, as well as adds to the stigma that all persons who have suicidal behaviors have a clear wish to die. And as we've talked about in the myths, that's not true. Again, this type of statement adds to the stigma. So now instead of completed suicide or successful suicide, we say this person died by suicide or ended their life by suicide. Again, we're trying to use direct language that shows compassion, shows no judgment, and hopefully allows the person that is hearing this to know that we're a safe person to have these conversations with. Tearing down those stigmas is important. Having open conversations to learn from each other is important. It allows us to be more aware of our own self and those around us, aware of factors that may increase a person's risk of suicide is very important. So risk factors are things such as elements in a person's life that can put a strain on their ability to cope with stress and trauma, and therefore associate it with increased suicide risk. Risk factors can undermine an individual's resiliency, so their ability to bounce back from those difficult situations and adjust those hard times and those challenges. So these are different risk factors that could pose a further risk for a person who is struggling. It's important to become familiar with these increased risks because statistically we know that certain people in certain populations are just at a higher risk, and we need to be more mindful of that. Knowing this, we can be more aware to identify alternatives and advocate for policy change and seek help and support for everyone. It's important because we know people have suicide thoughts. We know people have suicide behaviors, and we know that people die by suicide. An average of 10 people a day die in Canada each day by suicide. It's important to understand that the presence of one or more of these risks that I'm going to mention doesn't mean that a person is always thinking about suicide, but it does mean, however, that their risk has increased. So we know, statistically speaking, that women are more likely to have suicide behaviors, but men are actually at a higher rate of death by suicide. And mostly men in their 40s to 50s have a higher rate of suicide and they're actually 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women. We know that studies show that someone who has suicide behaviors in the past are at increased risk of having suicidal behaviors within the first 3 months to the first year. We know that the 2S LGBTQIA+ community members are 5 times more likely to think about suicide. And we know they're 7 times more likely to have suicide behaviors than the general population. So these, again, are risk factors that we know are true. The Indigenous suicide rate is 2 to 3 times higher than non-Indigenous rates for Canada. First Nation youth suicide rate is 5 to 6 times higher than non-Indigenous youth. And rates among our Inuit youth are among the highest in the world. Some other common risk factors include history of mental illness, history of substance abuse, history of trauma, family history of suicide, a job or relationship loss, lack of social supports, and barriers to accessing healthcare. Knowing these risk factors gives us a chance to be more aware, to take notice, and to watch for warning signs that we're going to kind of get into a little bit later of what to look for, because we want to keep people safe from suicide. Because every single death by suicide, at least 7 to 10 people, survivors, are significantly affected by that loss. It's a ripple effect of loss throughout communities, families, and persons who are experiencing thoughts and actions. How big this is for them, how lonely that is for them, how heavy it is for them to carry this. So us taking notice of these risk factors, us taking notice of these warning signs, us reducing the stigma and having conversations, it allows some hope. It allows people to feel less alone in these thoughts and actions. It allows people to hear other options and hopefully feel less overwhelmed coming out and talking about this. So this today and every time we have conversations, this is actually suicide prevention in action right now, because we never know who may need to talk about suicide, because anyone is at risk of suicide. Knowing the risk factors that may be associated with having suicidal thoughts and behaviors lets us know where to pay attention or how to pay attention, looking for those warning signs that they may be exhibiting. And these are going to be completely unique to each person because we're all different. We all react differently to different struggles. We all react differently to different situations. Unfortunately, not all persons exhibit warning signs, or they just may be very subtle. As we were saying, suicide is something that often gets us alone and isolates us. So oftentimes friends aren't maybe noticing, our family aren't noticing our signs. But a sign could be the isolation. That could be a major sign right there. People may mask what they're feeling or experiencing. And when we look at this iceberg right here, at the top, that's typically what we show society. When you think about going into work, we plaster the smile on our face, we pretend we're okay, and we get our work done. When we think of walking through a grocery store and people call out, "Hey, how are you doing?" And our first response is to say, "Fine, how about you?" We're often at times looking for that actual, how are they doing? On the outside, a person shows us that they might seem happy and well, but it's what underneath is what's making the difference. And it's picking up on those warning signs and what they mean. The stigma around suicide can limit what we share and what we share with others. And we know this. It's back to that fear and the judgment piece. But thankfully, some warning signs can give us clues to kind of further have these conversations, to take notice that someone is struggling, someone needs to talk. And that's our opportunity, these little warning signs.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so I don't know about the rest of you, but I need a little shake out after all of that. It's heavy conversation. So before we go into warning signs, we also want to talk about talked about risk factors, but it's really important when we talk about risk factors to also give attention to the factors that can offer some protection against suicide. So according to the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, or CAMH, the risk for suicide may be reduced when certain protective factors are present. So this is a non-exhaustive list, but in general, protective factors are things that can help a person recover or bounce back in the face of adversity and stress. So as I go through this list, now is a really great moment to think to yourself, what is life promoting to me? What is life promoting for my community, for the people who I love? Sometimes it can be nice to write these things down somewhere, or otherwise place some kind of reminder to ourselves around our homes or somewhere that we see often, to remind ourselves of things that are meaningful to us. We can't always remember them off the hop when we need to. So some examples of protective factors might include things like positive social supports. So positive social supports might be, they might come from participating in volunteer groups or drop-in centers, maybe identity-specific support groups or peer support groups, or like trusted friends, supportive friends, trusted and supported family members. Connected to this piece is also a 2015 study that was done by TransPulse Canada in response to the extremely high rates of suicide ideation and behaviors in the transgender populations. So TransPulse Canada undertook a study to determine what some effective interventions might be that could effectively reduce this risk. And the conclusion of the study, they concluded that interventions to increase social inclusion for transgender people, to increase access to medical transition and gender-affirming care, and to reduce transphobia have the potential to contribute to substantial reductions in the extremely high prevalence of suicide ideation and actions within the transgender community. So the authors do recognize that this is kind of a policy level change that they're asking for. But those of us who are concerned with suicide prevention, things like creating gender inclusive spaces, advocating for access to gender affirming care, those kinds of things are population level suicide prevention work that we can all do. Another piece that can offer protection is connection with and access to culturally appropriate supports. So connections with other people who can offer guidance to us through a culturally appropriate lens, that can be incredibly important. As you saw in the previous slide, the impacts of colonialism and racism have historically and continue to be deeply harmful to Black people, Indigenous people, and people of the global majority. So access to culturally relevant supports and culturally relevant guidance is a really important factor that can offer protection against suicide for these populations. Also a sense of responsibility to others. So this is more of an individual level. Having children or pets in the home, often, my cat is showing up right now, often gives us a sense of protection. This is different when a person has postpartum depression or psychosis. So there is that nuance there. But in general, a sense of responsibility to others, children, our community, a role that's important that we have to our community. These are all things that can offer protection as well. They've also listed positive coping skills here. So I generally don't love using the words positive and negative, but for now we're going to go with this. So what is meant by positive coping skills means things that we can do that help us feel a bit better without causing us or our communities physical, mental, or emotional harm. So things like maybe making art or music or otherwise being creative, going to a special place in nature with a friend, or cultivating some kind of a personal, meaningful practice. Doing anything that we enjoy can be a positive coping skill. Having a supportive relationship with a medical or mental health provider Of course, this is complex sometimes in Nova Scotia, but I also want to say that, you know, a mental health provider might be a social worker. Sometimes it's easier to access social workers. Many doctors' offices have social workers as well. Or it might be a community worker who can help you navigate systems and help you find your way to supports that you need. Religious beliefs, strong religious beliefs. So each individual is different. The things that are most important and meaningful to every one of us is going to be different as well. For some people who have strong religious beliefs, that acts as a protection for them. And the last one here is a sense of self-efficacy, which is a really big word that means a person's belief in their ability to succeed in specific situations. And there's lots of reasons why many of us don't have that belief in ourselves or that strong sense of self-efficacy. But there's also many reasons why people do, including having lived through really tough times before, making it through challenges, facing up to challenges in their lives in the past, and knowing that they can do it again. So building up our protective factors and contributing to the protective factors and promoting life-promoting factors in our communities, those are also really important parts of suicide prevention. All right. I hope everyone is feeling free to stand up and shake off and do what they need to do here. So what can we do? This is probably a big part of why we're all here today, I would imagine. We're all here because we're wanting to know how we can help. So let's talk about what helping is and what helping isn't. Helping is not someone who, helping is not fixing everything, and it's not making everything okay, and it's not counseling. What helping is in this context can be supporting, helping can be caring for the people around us, connecting to professional support, and for calling in emergency resources when it's necessary. We often think of helping someone who may be at risk of suicide as being an extraordinary act, and that it requires some professional credentials or experience. So while some people are professional mental health professionals, which is really important, we really need them, a large majority of people who are really effective helpers are caring friends, family, coworkers, classmates, peers, teammates, sports teams, community members. It might even be a stranger on a bus, right? We don't know what kind of conversations are going to be helpful to anybody in any given moment. So we really don't need to be professionals to equip ourselves with some basic information that can give us tools or help someone else in need. And helping, yeah, it doesn't mean offering all the solutions. It doesn't mean kind of counseling and like figuring out everything that's wrong and how to fix it. But rather, as a helper, we're there to provide support, and we're there to connect the person to the help that they need. So you have at the bottom there, we're going to notice, we're going to ask, and we're going to make connections. All right. So one of the big questions that tends to come up in these kind of conversations is, well, how do I know? How do I know if anybody can have these thoughts? How do I know if someone's having these thoughts? So we're going to kind of talk about that. How do we learn if this is something that we're dealing with right now? So general warning signs can come in many different forms. And contrary to what we might like to believe, and I think that this is probably fairly clear, but suicide thoughts are not that uncommon. They are things that people live with. They do happen, and we do need to talk about them. The practice of not talking about them is not making this go away. So we need to start a different practice and learn how to talk about this. So many people do live with these thoughts. They cope with these thoughts regularly. However, when they escalate and become stronger, suicide thoughts can quickly become suicide behaviors. And that's where we really want to stop that from happening. So noticing changes in a person's behavior can alert us to possible changes in their mental state and give us the opportunity to do an intervention or check in with them and help them be okay and get help that they need. We might notice things like changes in behaviors or physical changes. So Somebody who is really careful about their hygiene and showering or wearing a fresh shirt every day, we may notice that they're not doing that anymore. We may notice things like somebody is suddenly doing a lot more risky behaviors than they used to. Somebody who's normally very careful and quiet might suddenly become really outgoing and take a lot of risks. Kind of anything that is vastly different than their general baseline of a person is, generally something to pay attention to. Sometimes people mention things like giving things away, suddenly out of the blue starting to give away your belongings. So we notice somebody doing that, that's going to be a flag to us to check in. Either becoming very isolated or becoming extremely social when neither of those things are your usual. If you notice somebody doing that, we might want to check in. People might share that they're struggling verbally. So they might, be, as Sarah said earlier, saying specific words that lead us to feel that like, oh, they're thinking there's no hope. Or they might say things like, no one would miss me. We might be hearing some really strong words like that. We also might be seeing nonverbal body language. So like people might become very still or really active. Again, big differences in the usual and the norm is always a bit of a flag to check in about. Life circumstances. So life circumstances alone, they are neutral, they are what they are. However, we're all going to be responding differently to different life circumstances. So if we see that someone is struggling and we also know that they've just had a large life circumstance change in their life, like maybe they've lost someone, or they've, a loss of identity, a loss of a loved one, housing or job insecurity or financial loss. We know that that stuff has happened in their life and we're seeing some of these verbal or behavioral changes. That's even going to give us more of a red flag. The last piece there that we want to pay attention to is just that gut feeling. If we feel that something is really wrong, it's always good to check in. We don't always know why, we don't always know exactly what it is, but that is important to take seriously. And sometimes we're picking up on something that, is happening. So it's better to check in with people than to ignore it. Clearly, this is also not an exhaustive list. It's not definitive as well. I think the biggest piece to remember with this stuff is that we are all individuals, even though there's, these kind of bigger level patterns and risk factors and things that can happen. When it comes down to it, we're all individuals. So noticing this sign in one person, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have suicide on their mind, but it does mean that something is probably wrong and that it's possible that a person is thinking about suicide. So in a moment, we're going to just talk about what we can do if we notice these kinds of things happening.
So in noticing those things that happen, I thought the continuum is a great place to start. This is part of a continuum that I find helpful for myself and others that I support. It's a chance to notice what signs are present when we're thriving, and notice when we're starting to slide, when we're starting to struggling. And as Lindsay was saying, this is going to look different and be very unique to each person. So in the green, taking notice what you look like when you're at your best. So are you showing up on time for work? Are you making supper every night? Are you reaching out to friends and family, most of the time? Are you feeling pretty good about yourself? When you're starting to slide, you might notice some of those warning signs that Lindsay was talking about. So we try to catch these warning signs in the yellow and in the orange before they reach that crisis moment. So it might be in the yellow and in the orange that you're starting to feel a little bit frazzled. You're showing up to work, but maybe you're more distracted. Maybe it's taking you longer to do a task than typically is normal for you. Maybe you're throwing your hair up in a ponytail instead of doing your hair every day. And maybe your friends are taking notice, like something's going on. They seem a little bit different, right? Maybe you're not answering your messages or you're canceling your plans with your friends. So this is a chance to notice what you look like when you're in your green, what you look like when you're thriving, what your friends and family look like in the green, to be able to notice those subtle changes and bigger changes when they pop up. So in the yellow and in the orange and the red, I'm starting to struggle. Maybe there's a life change. Maybe there's a new challenge in my life. But I myself or someone has noticed that shift. Trying to spot the warning signs earlier is helpful. Before we get to that crisis zone, being mindful of ourselves and of each other is helpful. As we know with feelings, sometimes they hit us hard. When you think back of a life challenge that you may have had in your own personal life, maybe that challenge has hit hard and you've gone from green to red very quickly. And as we were talking about this before, sometimes we may have increased risk. So maybe we have a mental illness. Maybe we're part of one of those groups that are at increased risk. So maybe when something hits, we are going from green to red very quickly. So it's great to notice these changes and what they may mean for you. It's pretty normal to fluctuate. I know I fluctuate. Things pop up in our lives. We're busy, we have a lot going on. So our mental health changes all the time, regardless of if we're living with a mental illness or not. Our mental health fluctuates, and that's very normal. But it's the different ways we express ourselves and at any given time. Just taking notice again, just that word notice. Knowing what happens when we're not doing so well can allow us to prepare and strategize. And I always tell people it's better to have a plan. And this is when it's better to have a plan of what to do, what we need for support to safeguard with protective factors that Lindsay was saying earlier, those protective factors that we can put in place, our support networks, knowing them. So when I'm in the yellow and I'm canceling all my plans with my friends, I've let my friends know that that typically means that I'm not doing well with my mental health. So that might mean that you need to reach out more, or just that's a warning sign that I'm not doing so well. So it's just knowing ourselves and knowing each other and sharing those, being prepared, sharing. Again, conversations are important. It allows us to be aware. So having these conversations with our family and our friends and our close people to make them aware, to notice these changes, is an important part of suicide prevention and awareness for ourselves and each other. So the first thing in what we can do is notice and connect. And first, we need to establish a connection. So this may be someone we're very close to, but this may be a coworker that we don't know very well. So connection is the first piece that we really need to do with notice. And to do that, it's all about validation. Imagine telling someone something and you don't feel validated. And when someone is disclosing something that's so personal and not feeling that validation. So we ourselves can practice how to validate better. So when we talk, we can verify what we're hearing, because we often think that we may know what they mean, but let them hear what they're saying. So for example, I'm hearing that you're really hurting right now. I can tell that you're really upset. Allow them to talk. Allow that non-judgment of non-interruptions, of letting them talk and letting them hear what you're hearing. Point out what you're noticing. Again, back to those warning signs. This offers a bridge to that connection. It shows that first that you've noticed that something's a little bit off and that you've noticed that they're struggling and that you've taken the time to talk to them about this and showing that you cared. Back to that piece about alone. Now they have someone else that has noticed them, someone else that is willing to have a conversation. So behavioral changes. So it's pointing out those changes, as Lindsay was saying, those behavioral changes of maybe they're not bathing every day, or verbal. I've noticed that you're talking about a lot of dark stuff lately. And I was just wondering, like, are you okay? Is everything okay? Maybe it's a conversation about their nonverbals. I've noticed that you're really fidgety today, and you can't seem to sit still. Is something going on that you'd like to discuss? Maybe it's a life change, or circumstance or loss. I've just heard that this person has passed away. I just wanted to check in on you and to see if you wanted to have some further conversations. And back to that gut feel. Maybe we're not hearing anything. Maybe we're not seeing anything, but we just get that gut feel that something's not right. I need to talk to this person. I need to connect. While this may seem like an obvious first step of making a connection and noticing, it's one that oftentimes we may not do. And this is because we're busy, right? We kind of got used to not stepping in, of not knowing if it's our place. Oftentimes we may not notice what's going on with the people around us. Or we may not want to notice, because back to that fear and stigma, what happens then? What do I do then? I'm unsure what to do. So it's important to also care for yourself during that time and reach out for support. But once we notice that something is wrong and we can name it, that what we're noticing, it's more easy to create that bridge to the next very important step that is often very difficult step, which is asking that hard question, which Lindsay is going to go through.
Thanks, Sarah. So just to kind of place where we are here in this workshop, we've noticed, we're imagining that we are in the process of supporting someone right now. We've noticed that this person that we care about is their behaviors are different, or they're talking about things that are concerning us. They have reasons. We've noticed this and we've connected with them about it. So imagining that we're in that conversation with the person that we care about, and something inside of us is still wondering, is this person having thoughts about suicide? So where do we go from here? And what do we do? In order to help a person who's having thoughts of suicide, we need to know if suicide is what is on their mind right now. How are we going to know that? Remember that from earlier in the presentation, asking this question clearly and directly will not put this idea in someone's head if it is not already there. Rather, what it might do is, it may be the first time that somebody's been asked this question. It may be the first time that they've said it out loud, or it may be the first time that they're not completely alone with this thought. So it can be a very powerful question. It can also be a very hard question. And why would we need to ask this clearly and directly? And you'll see on the slide here, we also say ask kindly, because this is a tender question. It's a hard question, but it's a tender question. We need to know that we're on the same page as the person that we're supporting. So it can be really hard, again, to ask this question clearly and directly. However, asking a question like, are you thinking about harming yourself? That's a different question, right? And as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, self-harm and suicide are two different things. So that's a different conversation. If we need to have a conversation about suicide, we need to both know that that's what we're talking about. And the only way to know for sure that we are both talking about the same thing is to ask with kindness and clearly and directly. Just to keep it real, because that's what I love doing. I do this educational work all the time. I have these kind of conversations all the time educationally, and I still struggle in my personal life to break that fear and taboo and stigma and ask this question. That being said, I'm also so aware now of how important it is to ask this question and to push through my own fear and my own stigma and taboo around it, and to ask the question clearly and directly. So it does take practice. It also, when we are able to ask that question as a support person, it takes the weight off of the person who is having those thoughts. You can imagine if it's how scary it is for me to ask somebody if they are thinking about suicide, then how scary is it for someone to just randomly tell me? I don't know if they're going to be able to. Maybe they are, but maybe they're not. But certainly by asking, we're doing an act of care to let this person know that we do care enough about them to take that chance and take that risk. And do that work for them to break down that wall a little bit and let them know that we care about them enough to ask that question and to want to know the answer. One of the things that often comes up when we do workshops is like, well, how do you do that? Like, that's so awkward. Do I just see somebody struggling and I just blurt it out? And, that's sometimes, yeah, sometimes we can. We're all going to have our different styles and our different ways of communicating. But one of the things, like some of the things that have come up in our workshops is people will suggest kind of bridging this question. And the stuff that Sarah talked about earlier about noticing the things that are concerning us. So I've noticed that, you always look so sharp. And lately, it doesn't seem that you're putting a lot of care into your appearance. And I've noticed your dishes are piling up in a way that they don't usually. Naming those things that we've noticed can really help to bridge this question. We've also had a conversation. So we don't know what has just come up in this conversation, but we can say, like, sometimes when people think about these things or talk about these things, one of the things they're thinking about is suicide. Is that something you're thinking about? That can kind of soften that ask a little bit and make it feel a little bit more possible. Or we can say something like, I have to ask you a really tough question, and it's tough for me and maybe tough for you, but I really have to ask it. Are you thinking about suicide? None of us want to have this conversation, but it's certainly better to have it than it is to leave someone alone with these thoughts and not have it. Okay, so that is a really big piece. It's a big piece of what we do in a lot of the trainings that we do. And so again, more opportunities for learning about this stuff are around. But doing the work of asking, breaking that taboo and stigma, and being open to hearing the true answer, it really lets people know how much we care. It's a very caring and loving thing to do. And we need to do it without judgment. We need to let people know that we won't judge them, their feelings, their behaviors, and that we're there to support and help. So again, if you think a person is at risk, we need to ask. And if we can't ask, that's also absolutely okay. But what we want to do is find someone else who can ask, and make sure that that person is getting some support that they need.
So as Lindsay was saying, having that supportive, caring, being that supportive, caring person is so important when we're asking that hard question. And it's also important how we allow ourselves to listen. Being open to listen without judgment is critical when someone is sitting with suicide thoughts. And there's many ways we can do this, but I've picked out a few. Letting the person speak without interruption. And this one's sometimes tricky. Using silence can be hard. I know I feel awkward in the silence and I have to really practice this piece, but a lot of useful, great information can be gained from using silence, of just letting that person gather their thoughts and have a conversation. Paying attention to the actions of the person that's having these thoughts, and pointing them out. You seem like you're cold. Would you like a blanket? You seem like this is uncomfortable for you. Is there anything I can do to make this a little bit more comfortable? But our body language is also very important when we're listening with care. Imagine having a conversation with someone, and we've probably had many of these with someone that has their phone in front of their face. So we're going to get rid of the distractions. We're going to try to have this conversation with care, having appropriate eye contact, and kind of using our bodies, not having our bodies closed up, having them opened. receptive to that conversation. People can feel that in our body language. And using active listening can really help us to know what to do next. And for them to feel that heard. So repeating back the person's words that you're hearing about their thoughts about dying, hearing that out loud for the first time. Those thoughts may be circling in a person's head all alone for a long time. So when they finally say it, repeating it back, I heard you just say that you want to die by suicide. They've maybe never have heard that out loud. So how helpful would that be to hear that back? This can help the person feel heard. It can reduce the intensity and emotion and distress because, as I said, they may have never heard it out loud before. It can be hard to know what to say when someone's talking about suicide. And I often say we don't have a list of do's and don'ts, but then I have a list of don'ts. So I just find that this is helpful because back to that language piece, sometimes we don't realize how harmful our normal conversation vocabulary might be. So I again think it's helpful to hear it from someone out loud so you know how it's being perceived. So the first one is our vocabulary of someone has just disclosed that they're thinking about suicide, and we say things like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy talk. What are you thinking?" Vocabulary such as that. I mean, we have reactions ourselves as support people, but again, taking away that judgment piece, taking away that shame piece, and just letting someone talk. Instead of saying, "Wow, that's crazy. I can't believe you're thinking that." It's tell me more. Why are you thinking about this? Using language that is minimizing. An example of that might be, things aren't so bad. It sounds like you're just a little bit worried right now, but things aren't so bad. Again, we don't have to justify what they're saying. We don't have to agree with what someone is saying. It is their experiences with their feelings, and everybody's reactions are different. So allow that person to talk about their feelings without that judgment. Cheerleading. This is one I've struggled with. You're such a strong person. It's going to blow over. Just hold on. It's going to blow over. It's just harmful. And it can be very harmful if you're the person with thoughts of suicide. Because again, we're just looking for that kind ear, that chance to talk about what we're feeling. Being judgmental, and we've talked about this throughout the evening. It's just not helpful. Saying that things like, well, that's not going to solve your problems. Dying by suicide is not going to solve your problems. For that person in that moment, they may think that's their only option. So instead, maybe helping them discover other options would be more helpful. Giving advice, and our intentions may be good in this piece, but might not be welcomed and might shut down conversations. So I think that you should get a new job. I think you should get a new partner, and then everything's going to be okay. Advice is just not needed. Just allow that person to talk. Promises. And this is promises in a couple different ways. Promises that everything is going to work out. Don't worry. That's not something that we can guarantee. But also promises of what we can do. Call me anytime. I'm here for you. We may not be able to be there 24/7. And we're going to touch on that in a little bit of what our boundaries as a support person can be. That is going to allow us to be able to be a better support person for that person. And the last one is problem solving. Don't worry, we'll just get you a new job and everything is going to be okay. We're not there to fix problems. That's not going to be helpful. We're just there to be a supportive ear and connect them to people or other support people that can help them in those moments. So in this moment, we're just listening. They've just disclosed that they're thinking about suicide, and now let's just hear their story. Have never told their story. So all good intentions, but also sometimes our language can stigmatize and shut down conversations very quickly. So we just have to be mindful of our conversations and mindful of our language.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. For those of you who don't know Sarah, Sarah is an excellent listener. Yeah, so another piece that's really important, and that I'm sure we all are thinking of when we think about this work, is connecting to support. So after we've spoken with somebody, we've listened to what's happening for them, we've, been that open ear, we'll have a better understanding of how this person is feeling, and also of the severity and the immediacy of their suicidal thoughts. So that will help us to determine what our next steps are and what our resources connections are going to be. What we want to remember is that this person has just shared with us some really important information, some really vulnerable information as well, and we need to treat that information with care. And part of care is accessing support and of knowing when we need to get more help. So we don't ever have to promise somebody that we'll keep this kind of information secret or won't tell anyone else. It's not fair to us as support people or as friends or as family members to carry this information on our own. And trying to carry it on our own or promising to keep it a secret, we can understand why, because there's so much taboo, there's so much stigma, and there's so much fear. But if we promise to keep this stuff a secret, we are also really reducing the amount of supports we can access and resources that we and the person who we're supporting can connect with and can access. So there's lots of ways that we can get more support. And one of the ways is the operators of the crisis lines. And I know we keep saying this over and over again, but if we're supporting somebody and we don't know what to do next, we can say, hey, I need to call in some help here. Can we call this number together? You can call Talk Suicide and Talk Suicide Canada and say, this is the situation. How can I best support my friend right now? And they'll help you work through that. So they'll help you determine what the best next steps are. We don't have to know that all by ourselves. So our first step, one of the things we really want to do is make sure that this person is connected to resources. So resources, again, depending on the situation, it might be support networks. So we might be helping them create who are their trusted people? Who can they talk to about this? Can I help you talk to them about it? We need to let some folks know who can support you here. And to strengthen that social network. We also really want to make sure that that person has crisis numbers available to call, that they know how to call them, that they're easy for them to access that number. So that's really important. We always want to make sure that they maybe even have a number of crisis numbers, because for some reason, if you can't get through to one, there's other ones that you can call. Another thing that we can do as a friend and as a support person is to help them remember what their positive coping skills are and what their kind of life promoting factors are. Help them remember what's important to them too, what they can do now to help themselves feel a little bit better. It might be like, let's do some weird art together, or it might be something that's just important to them. And again, such a big piece of remaining non-judgmental and just working to keep that dialogue open. Community resources are also around and also might be helpful, right? So that's kind of where things like nurse practitioners or doctors or social workers or mental health community workers might come into play. People that can help and offer another piece of support to navigate towards some services that might be of use. Peer support groups can be really great for folks to talk about things that they're experiencing, especially identity specific peer support groups or culturally relevant peer support groups. Just check in here. Yeah, and if there's places that a person is interested in exploring or connecting with, as a support person, we can go with them. We can help them connect to those places. We also are connecting to supports and connecting to resources may also mean calling emergency services. So if a person, if that person is in imminent risk of harm, they've harmed themselves, they are about to harm themselves, or they're about to harm someone else, This is an emergency acting situation where we do need to call whoever our emergency services might be in that situation. So yeah, having crisis numbers available and easily accessible is really important. And we also want to make sure that we're not leaving that person alone. They've just shared with us some really vulnerable, really tender information, right? So if we can't stay with them, we want to try to find someone else who can stay with them. They might have again, that building that network and building that circle of support can be really valuable in these situations. Who are the people that can come by? Who can we call to make sure that you're not by yourself? Where can you go to make sure you're not alone right now? Figuring those pieces out can be really important. And that is part of planning for immediate and doable change, right? Is there a safer place for you to be right now? Maybe this person also hasn't had anything to eat or any water or anything to drink. So maybe we can offer them some food, some water, some simple changes that might make things feel a little bit better in this moment. And we really need to know our limits here, right? So we need to know how severe, how immediate is this situation? Do I need to call emergency services? If this person doesn't have people in their lives who can be with them right now, we may need to go to the ER so that they are not alone. We want to make sure this person is not alone right now. And we want to know what resources are available, and we want to have them ready. So that thing about putting those numbers into our phones, calling those helplines with that person, or calling those crisis lines with that person. And also just taking further training to be more prepared. And Sarah's going to speak a little bit more to just knowing our limits, thinking about what our limits are, and reaching out to further resources as well.
Thanks, Linz. So limits for us as support persons, and that's equally important of looking after ourselves. That balance, to maintain a balance in our own lives. Helping others can be stressful and emotionally draining, and it's hard work. So we have, as support people, have to take time to recharge our own batteries, because the level of care we give ourselves, we're going to be better able to care for other people. And I often refer to that plane analogy of when the masks come down and there's danger, we as support people have to put that mask on ourselves first, because we can't help anybody else if we're not helping ourselves. So another important piece is boundaries, and setting boundaries is also about helping that person you're supporting. It lets them know what to expect. It lets them know what you are able to offer them. It shows what's acceptable, and it allows you as a support person to know when maybe you need to step aside. So having boundaries protects yourself and those you're supporting. And there's lots of different type of boundaries, and it depends on your profession and your level of comfort with that person, your relationship with that person, what type of boundaries you may need in place. The next piece is understanding the difference between rescuing and supporting. It's not our responsibility to rescue or fix someone's problems. That's just not possible. And but it is our, we can offer support with listening. And that's how we can be the support person there. We can help a person navigate through their struggle, and we can help them find appropriate resources and supports that will further their safety while they're having those thoughts or those struggles. It's also important to make time for yourself and make yourself a priority. Because as I said, working in this type of profession, it can be taxing on a person mentally, emotionally. It can affect our relationships. So making time to make sure that you're the healthiest and the strongest, that you're able to help others, to re-energize. And the last piece, I think, in our limitations is don't be afraid to admit that you don't know the answer to a question. That's 100% fair. Not all of us have the experience of every particular issue that a person may come to us for support. So asking for help is a huge strength. Reaching out to those resources ourselves, calling those crisis lines together to find out those answers, because we are not going to know all the answers. Lindsay and I have been doing this for a few years, and we still have to kind of go to our resources and to find out answers. And that's okay, because that's a strength. And so use your strengths, use your limitations to protect yourself where you can be a better support person.
Right. So we're back to thinking about what is suicide prevention, just kind of the reason why we're all here today. Suicide prevention is a big goal, and it's about working towards reducing deaths by suicide. So you've already started this process by even engaging with this conversation today. Thank you for being here and for doing this and listening to this and staying with us today. So by increasing kind of awareness and beginning to reduce the stigma around these conversations, also advocating for policies that promote life or that support life promotion, and learning to have these conversations with each other, we're all doing suicide prevention work. Having the skills and the awareness before we need to, and before someone in front of us is in crisis, is suicide prevention work. So in preventing suicide in the big picture, intervention, so that's the kind of work that we do in the 2-day assist training, is more of a suicide intervention work. And postvention, so not reducing, but sort of addressing the impact on a community after a suicide, somebody dies by suicide in a community, and the impact on those of us who are affected by that. So that's all postvention work. Those are also components towards the goal of reducing suicides. So suicide prevention is a really big picture, and it really does take all of us and many different angles to start creating more suicide safe communities.
So we've been talking about some really hard topics tonight, and it makes me want to remind everybody that we have to take care of ourselves. So if you are experiencing thoughts of suicide today, and this presentation has brought up some thoughts as well that you need to discuss further, it's really important to notice that and take action on that. So if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts, please reach out to a crisis line or support line. Reach out to a family or friend. Have those open conversations. Talk about suicide. Also, there's peer support groups where we can talk about these lived experiences that are common. Because as we discussed, suicide thoughts are pretty common. And so talking about that with other people that get that is really powerful. Connect with someone on a regular basis. As we keep saying over and over, suicide gets us alone. So reaching out and taking away that risk factor of isolation, it can be very helpful. Talk to your family doctor or a mental health professional. And if you are in immediate care, if you need immediate care or support today, please go to your local emergency room or you can call 911. But please, we want you all to care for yourselves and each other. There are also some numbers here that we've provided. These are different crisis lines. So we have the 911 emergency service that anybody can access. We have put on the mental health mobile crisis team numbers, and we put both the local number there and the free 1-800 number. And we put the kids help phone and their email, the website, the 1-800 number. And we've also included, again, Talk Suicide Canada phone number. These are numbers that are accessible 24/7. So if you are in a crisis, there are people there to talk right away and will help you get to the support you need to stay safe from suicide.
as you can see, we are moving into the resources section here. We wanted to just flag on the CMHA-Nova Scotia website, there's a really great hub. It's called the CAST Hub, and that stands for Communities Addressing Suicide Together. So if you go onto the CMHA-Nova Scotia main page, you'll see CAST. And if you click onto that, you'll find in there a variety of well-researched resources, toolkits, and other information that can be really helpful in developing programming or understandings around suicide and communities. It's well organized, it's well designed, and a really worthwhile thing to look through. We also wanted to let you all know of a really great project called Roots of Hope. And in case you're interested, so Roots of Hope is a multi-site community-led project, supposed to be led, not let, that aims to reduce the impacts of suicide within communities. And they're doing some really interesting work right now in communities. Some of the things that they're doing is working with bereaved families of Nova Scotia to build capacity across Nova Scotia for suicide loss grief groups. And we will send in our follow-up email access to some of those groups in case anyone is interested in participating in that. They're also working with another organization called Healthy Minds and trainings to us LGBTQIA community members in Safe Talk. So there's workshops being planned across Nova Scotia for the fall of 2023. And they're working with the CMHA in Colchester East Hants to do Safe Talk with women survivor organizations as well. So they're doing some really great community-based work as well. There's quite a bit happening in Nova Scotia right now. So even though this topic is quite heavy and intense and can be really isolating, there is a lot of community-based work and initiatives that are coming up and happening around the province. And you can reach out to Roots of Hope, and they can also let you know the different things that are going on. So when we send our follow-up email, we will let you know of some of the things that we're aware of, including some events that are happening on September 10th for World Suicide Prevention Day.
Thank you, Lindsay. So the other ones that we wanted to mention are some upcoming educational pieces around suicide that Lindsay and myself and CMHA-Nova Scotia are putting on. The first one is Assist, which is a 2-day interactive workshop on suicide first aid. Assist teaches participants to recognize when someone may be at risk of suicide and work with them to create a plan that will support their immediate safety. This is a course that I recommend to all. It's a very, it's a 2-day, very interactive workshop. And the next one is Safe Talk. It's a half-day training in suicide alertness. It helps participants recognize a person with thoughts of suicide and connect them with resources that can help them in choosing to live. And you can find these on our on Eventbrite, as well as the website for CMHA Nova Scotia. And we have put on a couple dates up there of upcoming trainings of Assist and Safe Talk that are still open to the public. The Safe Talk one there is a free session that you can join. And and then we also have the Zero Suicide Alliance. And I was checking out this website last night again, and it has some really neat videos. There are 5 to 20 minutes in trainings that you can practice having these suicide safe conversations. And it's kind of broken up into different people that you might be having these conversations with. So it may be a veteran conversation or students. They have one on there for taxi drivers. If a taxi driver comes upon someone who's having thoughts of suicide, how to have that safe conversation. As well as information and little videos on social isolation. So I do recommend you guys check out all 3 of those if you want further learning, further information on suicide intervention.
coming around to the end here of this presentation. Thank you all for sticking with us. So we wanted to just also kind of give a shout out to some of the programs that CMHA Nova Scotia hosts. We host a Thrive Learning Center, which is an online educational learning center around mental health and remaining well, staying well, finding those kind of positive coping strategies and those life promoting factors. We do a lot of work talking about resources and different things like that. So you can check out, again, the website will have all of these on them as well. Project Hope is a program that CMHA hosts, supporting folks with mental illness to find and maintain housing. And we also have some peer support programs running right now, as well as a program called At Work, which is an employment support program working with folks who identify mental illness as one of their primary barriers to employment. We have a link here to the resource guide. So CMHA Nova Scotia's webpage has a pretty thorough resource guide that Erin and I have both really been diving into in the last couple of years and trying to keep updated. And we also have a link to a mental wellness toolkit. So this toolkit was developed, I believe, last year in collaboration with the Pictou County Mental Health Wellness Roundtable. And it's designed to support community members in taking care of themselves, taking care of the people in the community, and also managing crisis if they come upon it. And so it's kind of a toolkit. It's work. There's work pages as well as educational pieces in it. So it is designed to kind of build capacity and community that way. And this is the contact information for CMHA Nova Scotia, including our website. And we're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and that's our handle at the bottom there. So you can feel free to follow us and see what's happening or communicate with us that way. And also the education and training lead contact information, who is Carolyn, who has kindly joined us today. If you're looking for different trainings or any other information, Carolyn could be a great place to connect with there.